Good afternoon, good afternoon, and good afternoon. Thank you for joining me for another one of my Dungeons and Dragons video chats. This is the start of a new series that I am putting together to discuss general Dungeons and Dragons topics. I'm calling it Dragons Dungeon Talk, and for the opening of this new series, we are going to discuss the old adage that is oft used and, in my opinion, oft misunderstood: don't split the party. And what we are going to do is we're going to discuss why don't split the party is important, why it can maybe sometimes be overused and can be a little bit too stultifying, and how we as gamers can try and strike that nice tactical balance between not splitting the party but also not feeling too confined, or when might splitting the party actually be a helpful type of tactic to use, because I mean, with most blanket generalizations, they tend to be untrue in certain circumstances. So I thought it would be fun to do a deep dive into the notion of don't split the party and look at some of the ins and outs of it. Now, before I get into it, I would like to talk about why don't split the party has been used over the years. And Dungeons and Dragons has its origins as a tactical war game. It started out as chainmail, and chainmail was based on like a tabletop wargaming grid or hex crawl type scenario, where flanking and things like weapon speed and weapons themselves and various like tactical units had a lot more importance than the typical role play or focus on, you know, heroics that our present Dungeons and Dragons has. But since Dungeons and Dragons does hail back to the tactical war game, tactics are still a huge part of Dungeons and Dragons. A lot of the games are primarily based on fighting and challenges in combat encounters. Now, your game particularly could have more or less of this aspect of the game, depending on your game master and depending on your group, what your group likes. But regardless, your Dungeons and Dragons game is going to at least have some level of tactical combat. And in tactical combat, the cohesion and the integrity of your unit is a main determiner of whether or not you succeed in battle. And so getting separated can often be deadly. And in original Dungeons and Dragons, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, for example, it was often very deadly to have your party divided up and taken apart piecemeal by monsters. And in the present 5th edition version of Dungeons & Dragons, this can also be quite true, particularly during difficult encounters. And so this adage of don't split the party is kind of a warning for survival. It's like, if you split the party and you get separated, you're more easily taken down by groups of monsters, particularly by groups of powerful monsters. So what are the things to just generally consider as we're thinking about don't split the party? And particularly in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, we're thinking about, what is our distance from the healer? What is our distance from our ranged and area of effect support by, blasts or spells? Are monsters blocking us from our main party group? What are the numbers of monsters? Because, I mean, if you have a lot of monsters, it's going to be harder to get back and reunite with your party if you get kind of separated from them. And if there are less monsters, it's going to be easier to get back to them. And what is the overall encounter difficulty? If the encounter is easy it might not be so bad to break up the group, and you might gain some extra momentum from this wider spread that you have, some more power from maneuvers. So the more difficult an encounter becomes, the more important it is kind of to stick together more and rely on your allies more for support generally, right? Now these are general statements. There are always exceptions to these rules. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at some different scenarios, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the nuances of split the party or don't split the party in this case. So the first scenario, So the first scenario that I'm going to look at is an encounter that I had with my friends recently. This was a very deadly encounter in a game run by Dungeon Master Graham. So Dungeon Master Graham over on Twitch, check him out. And in this encounter, we got into a really tough combat. And I'm going to go ahead and roll back in the video here a bit. Let's see. So I'm going to point out some aspects of this encounter. So as we entered this room, we noticed that there were quite a lot of monsters in this main room area here. And they ambushed us in this choke point near the entrance. As you can see, there are these little cubby holes where they could come in around and flank us. And we quickly learned that if we stepped out into this area here, we got surrounded. And we used the optional flanking rules, and so we also got flanked and hit really hard by massive horde of monsters that just kept popping up out of the shadows in this main room here. And so we primarily got stuck in a defensive position in the front here. And then a mage came out and blasted us with a lightning bolt. And we had gotten into a straight line, which got ourselves into an AoE formation. Of course, we didn't know that there was a mage waiting back here to hit us with a lightning bolt. So we didn't know necessarily that getting into a straight line was a bad idea. But I don't know about you, but when I get into kind of a straight line, I get this little like tingly feeling on the back of my neck, and I'm a little concerned about it. And also when I get too clustered up with my party, I also worry a little bit about fireballs, which adds a little bit of tension to don't split the party, because you kind of want to be spread out enough to maneuver effectively and not be caught in AoEs. But on the flip side, we don't want to be so spread out typically that we can't support each other. So in this scenario, we got hit really hard, and then we got hit by a lightning bolt, and so it kind of rattled us a little bit. And one of our main melee fighters, by the name of Alinar here, he saw the mage, and he saw what he thought, and this wasn't necessarily a terrible idea, but it's a good example of, the adage, don't split the party. He thought that if he got out here, he could take down the mage. But I don't think he necessarily realized how many monsters there were out here. And so he's a Order of Ancients paladin. So what he did was he used his Misty Step ability to get out into the main room here. And then he used the rest of his movement to get right in the mage's face. But he didn't have enough movement left to make attacks on the mage. And as he was out here, we as a party began to realize a lot of things. One, our main healer was a shepherd druid, and he set up his unicorn spirit to provide some AoE healing within a 30-foot radius. And Alinar here was out beyond the unicorn spirit, and he was also out beyond the range of any healing spells, such as Healing Word. And though some of us had ranged attacks that could go out and hit some of these monsters out here, as well as AoEs, we couldn't provide enough support for him to shake off this group of monsters should they come in and attack him. However, that consideration didn't really weigh in too much, because Alinar had already been hit a number of times, and so his hit points were not maximum. And on the next turn of combat, this mage had a second lightning bolt, and Alinar unfortunately decided to still stand in front of him, and we still had enough players in a straight line. We didn't learn as a party from our first failure by getting smashed by the lightning bolts. So like some of us moved out of the way, but not enough of us. And so we got hit by a second lightning bolt as well, which knocked Alinar down. And with Alinar knocked down, now he was at 0 hit points beyond the range of our AoE healing ability from the Unicorn Spirit and from the Healing Word, which would have got him back to his feet. And also, it would be very difficult for any of our party members to reach Alinar out here on foot. And if we did, we'd also be at high risk of getting killed ourselves. The other main factor was we had a lot of monsters blocking us, a lot of monsters in this choke here. So moving around those monsters would also have been very difficult, requiring a lot of mobility that most characters didn't have. So getting out to Alinar even for a very mobile character would likely have taken much of a round of combat, and then getting him back would have taken another round. So the question would be, could this person that gets out there survive 2 rounds of being focus fired by lots of bads coming out of the woodwork here? And we had a lot of bads. So we couldn't heal Alinar, and then subsequently he failed 3 death saves. So then he died out here, and so what happened to us? We were taken down by 1 party member, and so we had to fight the rest of this very difficult battle with 1 party down, or we could have just all fled, but we decided instead to heroically try to fight to save Alinar. And though we did manage to kill off most of the monsters in these 2 main rooms, we just never really got back ahead of the monsters, and it ended up being a TPK despite a valiant fight. So here's an example of a difficult encounter where splitting the party, and substantially splitting the party beyond the range of healing support in particularly, likely resulted in us as a party getting TPK'd. And this is not to entirely blame Alinar. We don't want to like say, oh, well, that was dumb. We don't want to be negative in that way. But I remember Alinar's player thinking beforehand and saying things like, well, maybe I should go back and like shoot my bow, go back to this main room here and shoot my bow for a little while and get some hit points back. And I don't know, it's like he was weighing the decision between taking this risk of going out to attack this mage and splitting the party, or just kind of being cautious, and maybe might not have been as fun for him, in the round to round scenario, because he's not as good with a bow. He's really good with his great weapon. So I understand why he made this decision, but ultimately this particular splitting of the party did result in our party death, and we would have likely been able to fight our way through this encounter had we not lost Alinar. So a good example of don't split the party and why splitting the party can be a bad idea in certain situations. Okay, so moving on to like slide 2, I want to talk a little bit about why splitting the party is so alluring, why we want to split the party, and why it was not just why it was alluring for Alinar in this particular scenario, but why? Let's see here. Let me get the right slide here. There we go. So why is splitting the party so alluring? Why does it draw us? And why did it draw Alinar? Why does it why do we want to split the party? And part of it is Dungeons and Dragons is a game of heroism, and it's really cool to be able to kind of run off and do your own thing. And I don't know, I remember, actually, I'm just thinking about this, and I'm remembering like a scenario from Critical Role where the bard just went off and fought a whole bunch of bads by himself and nearly got killed. But it was like really kind of like an epic event. And so when you can pull it off, it is a lot of fun to split the party to do the heroic thing. But it's like a high risk, high reward kind of event. And when you're alone, wow, are you so much more likely to die. So so let's just kind of talk about this more. Why is splitting the party so alluring? Why does it feel so fun to split the party? Why is it like this? I don't know, just like you're being the Dungeons and Dragons bad boy. You're taking like the dark side of D&D tactics here a little bit. And and why is this? I mean, there's actually mechanical reasons for it too, because I mean, maneuver is really powerful. If you can maneuver strong units on the battlefield to explode and direct momentum or heavy hits against weak opponents, you can really crush the enemy. And so this is one of the reasons why splitting the party is alluring. We talked about this earlier. Taking risks is fun. I mean, it is. I mean, this is a game where weighing the risks and taking risks is a fun part of the game. We, as players, I mean, why do we play the game? I mean, we play the game because of, we love our comrades. We enjoy building characters. I mean, these are all aspects that are fun. But what's really fun about the game is being a hero, doing something heroic, and splitting the party sometimes can feel like, wow, I can do this heroic thing. I can go out and I can be the hero or die, which I guess is being a hero also. But if we die and then it results in our party death, that the flip side of that is it's not very heroic. Why else is splitting the party so alluring? Oftentimes we feel like we conserve our powers often, and we get this burning desire to really unload, to use our powers, and in a splitting the party scenario, in a maneuver scenario, we feel like we can often make use of our parties, or we really need to make use of our powers. And last of all is that feeling of needing to spread out in order to avoid getting caught up in AoEs. And even though this might not be splitting the party per se, it puts us on like a broader footing and might tempt us to split away from the party more. So it kind of tilts you more toward the splitting the party and less away from pivoting off one another. But there is a reason that there is this kind of like tension between like being like clustered together near each other in a group and being spread out, because spreading out also provides some advantages. Now, it is worth noting that you can still spread out and not be splitting the party, and you can still be able to support each other. And the level of spread that you can have for your party varies from group to group. It'll vary based on the range of your healing effects, or whether or not you even really have a main healer. The range of your like ranged attackers or AoEs. If you've got a party that's more set up for ranged and AoE attacks and less set up for melee attacks, then you can tend to spread out more and still support each other, for example. So there's an interesting place of balance between like spreading out maneuvering and like failing altogether and splitting the party and putting yourself at greater risk, rather than taking advantage of your spread and maneuver. And for each party, that's going to be difficult. Different. So for example, if your party is more melee oriented, you're going to tend to have like a smaller spread where you can support each other. But if your party, as I said before, is more ranged oriented or more AoE oriented, more caster oriented, you can spread out more. And so I'm going to look at some more scenarios. We're going to talk about this a little more by looking at some battlefield scenarios. And I'm going to take us to another battle that we recently fought in another one of Ted's games, Dungeon Master Graham. Go check him out over on Twitch. This is a Rime of the Frost Maiden scenario, so a traditional Dungeons and Dragons 5e adventure module. Rime of the Frost Maiden. I highly recommend you check it out. We did a modified version of the Tiger Tribe ambush out on the Reghead Glacier, in which we fought both the Tiger Tribe and Oral, who brought in a number of, I think these are skeletal frost giants and cold light walkers that teleported in. So we had 3 skeletal frost giants. I think that's the right name of the monster. Correct me if I'm wrong. and 6 Cold Light Walkers. But as you can see, they each teleported in a different section. And we had this nice high ground area here that we could defend. So, and we also had a, I think the Elk Tribe joined us as well. So we had members of the Elk Tribe. So we were able to spread out to try and defend this hillside. So we had a Blade Singer along with some Elk Tribe members and a Shield Guardian over here on one side. We had an NPC Velen over here toward the middle. We had our main fighter, who is Arameus, and our main ranged weapon attacker, who is an Artificer Ranger Rogue, who uses a repeating laser rifle, which is really badass. And over here on this side, and we had a blasting sorcerer with her summons, which was summon Draconic Spirit over here on this side, along with some Elk Tribe members as well. And so in this party, with the Blade Singer, who had a lot of blasting spells, with the Draconic Sorcerer, who had a lot of blasting spells, with our Ranger Grim, Wilhelm Grimm, and our Paladin is like the one like melee type. We were able to support each other with ranged and AoE on all of these fronts. For example, Wilhelm could shoot his laser rifle over here if he needed to, or either of us could drop an AoE down in this range, or down to protect any of these flanks. So even though we were spread out, we weren't necessarily split. In addition, we didn't have any enemies between us and each other, so we could collapse ourselves back in if we needed to. Also, we were getting hit by a lot of AoEs in the form of ice storms, both from a Frost Druid and from Oral. So being spread out actually prevented us from taking a lot of damage. And I would say that even though we were spread out, we weren't splitting the party. Now, what happened during this encounter was really dynamic. We dropped a lot of fireballs and shot a lot of laser rifle blasts on the enemy. We collapsed this flank, for example, and brought my Battle Sorcerer, Draconic Blaster Gleed back over here with Malachi, who was the Blade Singer, and with the Shield Guardian and some Tiger Tribe individuals over here, so that we could avoid the aura effects of the Cold Light Walkers and the melee from this skeletal frost giant here, while continuing to hit them with blast. So we kind of collapsed into a defensive position here while we took out both of these flanks. And then as we did that, after we took out the flanks, then we were able to bring our AoEs and ranged attacks onto Oral and onto this flank here, which ended up working really well. So even though we were really spread out, we weren't splitting the party. So a good example of ranged and maneuver supporting the party. And in addition, we didn't have a dedicated party healer for this combat. Our party healer, which was also a Shepherd Druid, was absent for the combat. So we didn't have a party healer, so we didn't have the consideration of needing to be close to the party healer. And even though our Paladin could heal some, his healing ability was not enough to recommend us clustering in close to him. So a good example of spreading out, but without splitting the party. So I'm going to move on to another scenario, this one from Battlestorm Valhalla, or Battlestorm Online. And okay. Let's see. So I will advance to this other scenario that we had. So we had an encounter in which, let's move it forward just a little bit more. I want to show you the AoE that we dropped in here. Okay, here we go. Let's see if this is, yep, this is right. So we had an encounter where we encountered a number of kobolds and some of these, I don't know, like weird giant kobold or draconic abomination things. I don't really exactly know what kind of monster they are, and I don't want to look them up because I don't want to metagame. I'm thinking that we might continue to run these encounters with these critters, so I'm not gonna really look them up until we're like through this scenario, and I might ask Ted, hey, what kind of monster was that? Because I might want to check it out. I suspect that it's from Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, but I'm not sure entirely. But just suffice to say, giant draconic abomination kind of thing, that's belched acid and had some relatively difficult melee attacks. So as you can see, our main group is in this hallway here, kind of clustered up. But we also have my character, Morgan Schnee, that advanced to kind of scout out and ended up getting stuck in a pocket behind some enemies. And the question is this splitting the party? And I would say that if it is splitting the party, it's kind of mildly splitting the party, because our healer, and we actually have kind of many like secondary healers in this party, so it's not really fair to say that Syrah is our healer, but I guess Syrah is like our main healer. She has healing word, and she's a celestial sorcerer, so she can spend a bonus action to commit some other healings. But Morgan here is not 60 feet away from Syrah, so Syrah can still spend a minor action to heal Morgan. And in addition, what Morgan has done, or had done, was try to set up flanking for the rest of her party, but ended up getting stuck a bit away, just given how the actions evolved in the initiative order. And so instead of flanking, what the party decided to do is drop Armor of Agathis here in this AoE here to catch the critters in this darkness, and also allowing Syrah, who has Devil Sight, to still hit them. And so Morgan was able to be supported by this AoE, and is still able to be healed by Syrah. And in addition, the party could deploy and drop AoEs into this zone here, so long as they didn't need to see the enemies. So even though Morgan is out ahead of the party, I wouldn't call this splitting the party, even though the enemies are blocking, because she's still supported by AoE. And given the number of monsters, and this is a little bit contingent on luck, if there were like a massive horde of monsters in this zone between Morgan and the party, then Morgan would be in a lot more trouble. And so Morgan's move out here onto the flank, setting up some maneuver advantage for the party, might have turned against her. Or if, like, say, for example, a lot of bads came in through this door here. But in this case, it didn't, so Morgan ended up getting kind of lucky. Now, worth noting that Morgan also has Misty Step, so if Morgan really needed to, she could Misty Step back to the party, although it would require her to Misty Step over to here and then move through this AoE, which would involve her taking some damage. So, but in a like really bad scenario, Morgan could have gotten away if need be, and maybe taken some damage from the AoE, but gotten back to the party in like a worst case scenario. So I guess that's another aspect of it, is can you get back to the party, reasonably speaking? And in this case, I'd argue, yes, Morgan could get back to the party if need be, and there really weren't enough monsters. This wasn't really a super difficult scenario. So even though Morgan's a little bit out here on the fringe, I would say that this doesn't really technically constitute splitting the party, even though Morgan's taking some risks from maneuver here. So maybe a little bit riskier, but not entirely splitting the party. Okay, and so let's look at another scenario here. We're going to look at our last scenario. And so this is also another Battlestorm Online game. Actually, let's see. This was an earlier encounter in which we confronted a mob of kobolds. I know it's like the same dungeon scenario, but we're playing the game like a virtual reality MMO, and so we have to come back and re-clear certain areas of monsters, even though we have different encounters in the same zones, which is kind of interesting, but it's also a lot more like an MMO than typical Dungeons and Dragons. So in this scenario, we had our druid, our moon druid, get a little bit away from the party, rushing into an area where there were a lot of kobolds, and there ended up being like kobold sorcerers and some kobold dragon shields in this area. And so he was he ended up moving. He was more than one move away from the rest of the party, which was a little bit split. And he ended up getting mobbed and hit pretty hard. So the question is this splitting the party? And I would say, even though he got extended, it's not quite splitting the party. He got himself in kind of a bad spot because, one, he was a little bit unlucky. Maybe he should have known that there were a lot of dudes out here to kind of mob him. He didn't necessarily go in there with didn't seem to go in there with necessarily with a plan for his defense. And he didn't have healing support because our healer was back here more than 60 feet away. So but worth noting that there were no enemies blocking our movement to him, so we could get up there, although it would take us a little bit of time to get up there. And even though there was this basilisk up here on a separate level, this basilisk was, up above, so we could move below the basilisk, even though the basilisk was giving us a little bit of a hard time because we had to avert our gaze. So on the scale of 1 to 10 is displaying the party, I'd say maybe a 6, maybe a little bit, but not a lot. And we were able to rush in and get him the support he needed. So even though he got knocked out of his wild shape and took some damage, he didn't get taken down, and we were able to provide him support within a round. So this wasn't splitting the party too bad. Now, if he had moved up, say, to here, and got hit from two sides, then and isolated, then that would have been a little bit worse. Although, considering the difficulty of this encounter, I'd say this encounter was like a moderate high difficulty, not like really high. So our danger from splitting the party was not quite as high. So it was a little bit more forgivable. So 4 scenarios: one in which the party was definitely split. One in which we were spread out, but it didn't result in splitting the party because we were able to support each other. One in which we had a scout moving on ahead that ended up in a higher risk scenario, but was able to be supported due to a closer proximity to our party generally, and closer proximity to a healer and AoE and range support. And a 4th scenario in which someone got further out and kind of pushed to the edge of splitting the party, but basically didn't quite get there. So hopefully some good examples of some of the nuances of splitting the party for you guys. And we could really go on and on and on about this notion of don't split the party. So I'm going to go on for a little bit longer. We're going to talk a little bit more about some of the issues. So why is splitting the party so deadly? And so we're going to move on to another slide here. Let's see. So why is splitting the party so deadly? And particularly in difficult encounters, like really difficult encounters. So first off, D&D parties are powerful together. They create a synergy. So each player can do their own thing, but if the parties can support each other, if they're within range to support each other with healing, ranged AoEs, and melee, particularly flanking if you are using the optional rules, or even just providing advantage through other means, like I don't know, like a fantastic new spell such as Silvery Barbs. If you are together or close enough, like say with good rules of thumb are like within 30 and 60. Those are like the typical ranges where you can help each other. 60 is a little spread out. 30 is closer. And of course there are exceptions, like we saw this the second slide series I showed you, in which we were on this big hilltop where we had a lot of range and we could pivot back if we needed to. But generally speaking, 30 and 60 are like the thresholds where parties can support each other really well. So D&D parties are powerful, and more powerful when they are able to support each other, which create force multipliers and synergies. Individuals are weaker, and even though D&D players individually can be pretty powerful, and optimized players can be more powerful. It's really not always good to pick up that like Superman mentality, like I can do it all myself. Typically, you can do more with your group than you can without. The second point here is it's easy for monsters to surround, isolate, and kill a lone adventurer. If you are out there by yourself, it's easier for a group of monsters to block you from your group, to block you from your support. And if you're far away and you don't have a lot of mobility options, it can be really hard to get back to your group. Now, there are certain characters that have more mobility options that can kind of stretch this rule more. And who are they? I'd say they're like your blade singers, which, if they have, particularly if they have Misty Step and Haste active, for example. They're your monks. Monks can be really mobile and kind of flit out and flit back. And any players with the mobility feat and extra speed for whatever reason. So highly mobile characters can stretch this rule a little bit more, can get away from being surrounded a little bit more, and can be a lot of fun to play. Even though you can really maybe get overconfident and risk getting killed. Like I've certainly seen monks get separated, get overzealous, for example, and get stuck away from the party as well. So, but it is, going back to this point, it's easy for monsters to surround and kill a lone adventurer, particularly a less mobile adventurer. And last of all, why is splitting the party so deadly? Loss of a party member in a deadly encounter can lead to a TPK. So if you get split from the party and killed, you're really hurting your buddies, and you're taking away all the wonderful things that you can do round to round to round for that entire encounter, particularly if it's a deadly encounter. And in a deadly encounter, it's sometimes better just to do the not glamorous thing and keep your powder dry until you have the opportunities. Because even if, like, say for example, you're falling back and using a ranged weapon in the event that you're typically like a great weapon fighter, but you're falling back and using a ranged weapon to conserve hit points and get more healing, your action on that turn and then on subsequent turns is going to be a lot more effective than that one amazing round, especially if the combat lasts for 20 rounds and you're able to survive throughout all those 20 rounds. Your iterative examples are going to be cumulatively more powerful than that one big boom round. The other thing is that if you get killed before you use all of your major powers, then all of those powers are lost to the party. So, for example, in the one example where I'm showing where we split the party, Alinar hadn't yet used any smites to my knowledge. So, and he is a paladin, level 5. So we as a party lost all those smites that he could have used throughout the encounter. And there were a lot of undead in that encounter, and that would have really, really helped us to have that extra damage. So just an example of why splitting the party and subsequently losing party members can be so deadly. Okay, so I'm going to move on to another slide and just talk about some rules of thumb. Were there some helpful rules of thumb in play so that we can enjoy the fun power of maneuver and not really technically split the party? And so the first rule of thumb that I really don't see people use a lot, which can really help and still be a lot of fun, is the old school, let's say just infantry training, like military training. Have a buddy, have a battle buddy. Bring a buddy with you if you decide to go out into the hinterlands. Ask your friends, say, hey, I want to go over here. This looks like it might be a little dangerous. Will you come along with me? Will you back me up? And usually it's a lot harder to kill two than it is to kill one. And if something bad happens to one of you, then the second person still has their actions to bring you back, or to, like in the worst case scenario, pick you up and like in the fireman's carry, and haul you off back to your team where you can get more support. We talked a lot about this before, the 30-60 rule. Keep your healers um, and your heavy melee support within 30 or 60 feet if you can. I mean, sometimes, you want to go out and you do the maneuver. But if you can, keep your buds, keep your healers particularly, or your heavy hitters within 30 and 60 feet. And that makes it easier for them to get to you, to heal you, and to provide you that support that you need. Generally speaking, also stay within ranged and AoE support. And this will vary based on your party. If you've got like a sharpshooter that's got a bow that can reach out and touch someone all the way to the range of 600 feet, then you can potentially still have that support so long as the archer is like within your line of sight. Now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend running out all the way to 600 feet just because you have one archer in your party that can reach out and tap some bads near you. But it might increase the bubble of your maneuver capability as a party without like technically splitting the party. And also consider the AoE support that your party can throw down. Can your party throw down area denial like Hunger of Hadar, which I showed an example of, which is, in my opinion, an amazing area denial spell, or things like Spike Growth that can limit the enemy's ability to get to you while creating a barrier and a buffer so that you can get back to your party when you need to, or just things like I don't know, Fog Cloud or Basic Darkness that reduce the ability of the bad guys to see you and therefore focus fire on you. So can your party provide that AoE damage or AoE area denial support to support you when you go out there on your own? And last of all, as a party, try to maneuver in such a way to prevent the monsters from blocking you from your allies, so that you can get back within range to help them, either through touch healing spells, or just being able to pivot off one another in a shield wall style formation to prevent individual players from getting encircled and cut off. So these are some helpful rules of thumb that you can use to prevent yourself from splitting the party. So what have we learned? We've learned that splitting the party is a bad thing. But we've also learned that maneuver and spreading out is a powerful aspect of the game. It's also a fun aspect of the game. And it also can be fun to take some risks. So let's take this adage of don't split the party with a little bit of a grain of salt and not let it ruin our fun. But also in the back of our minds, let's also think about how we can support our buddies, our allies, and bring parties back together after we have used powerful maneuvers and prevent monsters from breaking us up. And also think about how difficult the encounter that is getting hurled at us is and how much risk we want to take. Do we want to make sure that we're around to do our round after round after round damage and effects, to stay alive, to help support our buds and be more effective over the course of the combat, rather than like seeking glory in just one round or responding to a terrible monster threat in one round, just kind of balancing that potential powerful one round effect with the usefulness of our character over time. So balancing the risks, the rewards, and the fun, which is all a part of the fun of playing this wonderful game that is Dungeons and Dragons, which in many cases is both a tactical game and when we get into combat, it's a game of risk management. It's a game of deciding how to make good choices in a tricky situation. All right. So thank you all so much for joining me for my first Dragons Dungeon Talk. We're going to have some more of these. I think for my next one, I'm going to talk about some homebrew rules and alterations for weapons feats in Dungeons and Dragons to make weapons more fun in Dungeons and Dragons, and I think I'm going to make three or four little little video blog explanations of these homebrew rules that I think I'm going to try out in my Battlestorm Ragnarok game, which I am running and streaming live over on Twitch. And so, I don't know, maybe you'll come and watch it. I'm thinking about making this a level 5 or 11, a level 5 or level 7 patch for the Battlestorm Ragnarok game. So we will talk about some optional weapon rules, particularly some homebrew feat alterations for Dungeons and Dragons 5e, which might make weapon use more fun and more varied. I talked about a little bit about working with the rules to make weapon use more fun and varied when talking about using Great Weapon Master with a longsword. Here, what we're going to do is we're going to modify some feats. So a little bit of a preview for you guys. All right, so thank you for joining me, and I will be back with you soon. And this is the end of